Thank you for doing that. We appreciate it. All right, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and call this special meeting of the City Council for this special agenda item. Call to order. Please rise for a moment of silence, and then we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Mayor Jones.
Here.
Vice Mayor McPartland.
Here.
Councilmember Nunn's excused. Councilmember Matthews excused. Councilmember Dodd.
Here. All right, thank you so much for that. Now we have a presentation. Who's going to start, Mr. Benton?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as council is aware, staff has brought this item before you all tonight. There has been discussion amongst properties within the city and in the general area in regards to community development districts, or CDDs. And the city has not had a CDD currently. We do not currently have an ordinance in place. And I felt like as we're starting to go down discussions on what continues to happen within the city of Sebastian, it was prudent for us and for council to have a presentation on CDDs, understand what they are, and have a presentation from an attorney that handles these across the state and is well versed in this, so that he's going to give a presentation, but then it's going to be a Q&A where he can answer questions from council, and then obviously we have public input that can provide some answers as well on that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jer Earlywine. I hope I said it correctly. And so thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you all. Perfect. Okay, great. Well, thank you guys, obviously, for having me. My name is Jer Earlywine. I'm with QTAC Rock. I also have with me a number of other folks. Phil Hunt, though, will be presenting and doing some of the Q&A with me. Phil is with the firm of Rothel Hunt & Associates. Briefly, by way of background, QTAC Rock is a national law firm. We fundamentally focus on special taxing districts and municipal finance. We've got over 500 lawyers around the country that do that. In Florida, we have over 20 lawyers that work on community development districts and stewardship districts, which are kind of their larger cousins. We've got, as I said, about 20 plus lawyers doing that just in Florida. We represent probably half of the 1,100 or so CDDs in Florida. And also among our ranks are some of the founding members of sort of the legal part of the industry with Jonathan Johnson and Cheryl Stewart, who actually just recently retired. So we've got a lot of institutional knowledge about CDDs. Phil's group, whereas we sort of do the legal part of it, his firm, Rothel Hunt & Associates, is a management firm. Phil himself was a municipal underwriter, so he's done a lot of municipal bond finance. He's done a ton of CD financings as well, but his firm primarily does the management side of it. They also work on hundreds of CDs in Florida. He's also helped advance legislation in other states that's very similar to the CDs that you see here in Florida. So he's a really great resource on the management and the financing aspects as well. So we're both really grateful for y'all to make some time for us tonight. I've looked at y'all's agenda. Looks like y'all been working pretty hard yesterday, today are busy days for you, so we appreciate you making some time for us. Just to get you started, the Community Development District is actually kind of a straightforward concept. The way I like to conceptually think of it is it's really just a more capable version of a homeowners association. It works a lot like an HOA. It allows developers to put in a little higher quality project, still keep your house costs affordable, and then it's a much better operation and maintenance entity than your traditional HOA. And I think that's why, and we'll talk about some of the benefits here in a minute, but that's why they've grown so much over the last 20 or so years, and why you have 1,100 or so CDDs in Florida now. In fact, if you look across the nation, there's master plan communities, 85% of them are actually have some form of special taxing district involved. So it's not just Florida. All the way from California up to New York, down to Florida, every state has some version of this. And I think the reason is that growth has to pay for itself. And that's fundamentally what a CDD is all about, is making sure that that neighborhood pays for its own way and also has the resources and capabilities it needs to take care of that infrastructure long term. If you look at any particular given year, the top 50 master plan communities in the nation, Florida's a really popular state, and 15 to 20 of those, depending on the year you're looking at, are actually in Florida. And of those 15 or 20 Florida communities that are bestsellers around the nation, all but 2 of those are CDD communities, and sometimes there's a third one, but it's the 2 Margaritavilles, and then maybe 1 or 2 others, depending on the year, are all CDD communities. And again, it goes back to the fact that there's a lot of advantages to CDDs, and they include the bigger name ones you'll probably recognize, Lakewood Ranch and Vieira Stewardship District and Nocatee, the villages, and those are the big name ones that you see, but the vast majority, over 2/3, maybe 75% of the CDs in Florida are fairly small communities. They're 300, 400, 500 unit communities that have these CDs in place to really sort of take on that role of operating and maintaining your community infrastructure. So you sort of hear the big names, but there's a lot of them are just kind of regular day-to-day communities. So let's talk about kind of what it is and then kind of how they work. As I mentioned, conceptually, think of it like an HOA that has more tools in its tool bag. What a CDD does to begin with is, in order to get it established, we come to a city or county, ask the city or county to establish it. Once it's up and running, again, it operates a lot like an HOA. Your developer sits on the board in the early years of the project, and eventually that'll turn over to resident control, just like an HOA turns over. The CDD board actually turns over earlier, and it also usually has staggered terms, so you have the developers and the residents on the board at the same time. They kind of learn from each other. It's really a much better turnover process, but in any event, we'll talk about that later. But once that board's established, the CDD board will go out, they'll basically take out a loan. They'll issue a tax-exempt bond, which is basically a loan, just like a city loan would be. They issue the bond, and they use the money to put in your roads, your stormwater ponds, your utilities, your amenity centers, all the infrastructure that's needed for the community. They'll put that in, and then they can spread that cost over a period of 30 years. And in order to repay that 30-year loan, they'll put a special assessment on the property just within their boundaries, just within that community, to fund the infrastructure. Once the infrastructure's in, which usually, depending on the size of the project, may take a year or 2, it turns into basically an HOA and starts the operation and maintenance. So let me actually use my slides a little bit here. Let's see what we got here. We talked about the 1,000+ CDDs. 85% of master plan communities have special taxing districts. We kind of talked about what they are. All right, so let's talk about some of the benefits. And so you say, okay, well, that's great, Jared, but we understand what it is. But what are some of the benefits? Well, on the front end, as I mentioned, it allows us to put in infrastructure at less cost. We're issuing a tax-exempt bond, so the money costs less than a traditional mortgage loan or something like that. You're also spreading it over a 30-year period. So while residents might have a $1,200 payment or $1,300 payment today, we all know from especially the recent inflation of the last couple of years, and $1,200 or $1,300 today is a lot different than $1,200 or $1,300 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 30 years from now. That capital assessment typically does not change at all, and so the amount that they're paying over time is practically nothing. If you think about $1,200 30 years from now, it's going to be almost nothing. So it's a really efficient way to put in some of the infrastructure, and it allows us to have more money in the project. And that's why when you think about CDD communities, and again, I'm going to use some of the bigger name ones, but the smaller ones are the same thing. Lakewood Ranch and Vieira and Nocatee, the reason that people buy into those is they look awesome, right? They got the big sign at the front and the nice landscaping and the beautiful amenity package. And that's because of the CDD dollars, and people can still afford to buy into them because of that CDD money, and it means the infrastructure costs less. They can still afford the houses at the end of the day. So it's a really great program financially for the residents because you can spread that capital cost over such a long period of time, and it's at a tax-exempt rate. it doesn't just save you money at the front end, it also saves you money later on. At some point, you guys know this as well as anybody, as people have to budget for roads and aging infrastructure, CDs and communities have to do the same thing. And so when they come back and they got to fix up their roads or their stormwater ponds or whatnot, unlike an HOA, which either has to really struggle to set aside reserve monies every year, unlike an HOA, the CD can actually take out another loan later, or they can refinance their bonds. They can take out a bank loan on a tax-exempt basis, and they can refurbish their roads and their stormwater ponds when they need to. And this especially helps if you run into a situation where you've got some emergency crisis that comes up. You have a big storm event that damages the community, and God knows we all live in Florida. We see this all the time. And I actually have homeowners from existing communities call me and say, hey, can we set up a CDD? Because, we were just reclassified as a flood zone community, and we need to raise the level of our roads, and we can't get a bank loan because all we have is an HOA, right? CDs don't have that problem. They collect on the tax roll, and so banks will actually loan them money because they can collect on the tax roll. It's a 99%, you see the bullet up at the top, 99+% collection rate. Even during the Great Recession, they were collecting at 95+% on these communities. Great collection mechanism, allows them to take out loans, fix up their infrastructure, and you don't end up with those one-time balloon assessments that HOAs have when they get into trouble, and they've got to do something. They can't get the loan, they can't spread costs over time. They've got to do a one-time assessment, and we've all probably seen that or heard of that through friends and others. So that's one of the big advantages is financially, it'll save you money on the front end, allows us to put in a better quality project. It saves them money later on too. Beyond that, though, there's so many wonderful operational benefits of CDDs compared to HOAs, too. We mentioned sort of the emergency crisis response, but it's reinforced by the fact that CDs are FEMA eligible in most instances. They can also, they're part of that statewide mutual aid program, other emergency service programs, so they can actually get emergency service and get FEMA funding if there's storm events. We've had numerous CDDs do that. HOAs typically can't get that kind of aid. CDs also have sovereign immunity protection, and you can talk to Phil. He's got obviously the CD business, but he also has an HOA business. And if you compare the insurance and the liability for a CD versus an HOA, it's so much different with the CD because it has sovereign immunity protection, just like you guys do as the city, so does the CD. So, slip and falls and tort liability is much less with the CD, and the insurance responds to that, and you get better insurance, less costly insurance that the residents have to pay for ultimately. Beyond that, CDs also are very transparent. We are subject to sunshine laws and public records laws. We have to have public meetings, just like today's meeting, and we'll get into the transparency stuff in a bit. But overall, the comment that I hear the most is that, especially from people who live in CDs, in fact, I was down in another city maybe a year or two ago, the biggest advocates for the CDD being established in that instance were two ladies who were on the city council, and they said it helps us maintain our property values better, and that's exactly what it does. It allows you to better take care of your stuff than a traditional HOA. And in fact, I was in Marion County getting a CDD established not too long ago, and the item on the agenda in front of me was an HOA. They were coming to ask the city to take over their roads and their stormwater because they can't go on the tax roll, right? They have to put little liens on individual homes. They couldn't collect to take care of their stuff, and so they're trying to get the city to take it back. And we saw a lot of that around the Great Recession when HOAs were failing. CDs, were able to step in and take over things. Same thing with sunset rules. CDs are much less likely to sunset than an HOA, and so that can be a problem for HOAs as well. So there's a lot of upside on the operations aspect. Just look at my slide here and make sure I didn't miss anything. I think that's a lot of it. Let's see what else we have here. So this is another chart just comparing the CD versus HOA. You can see here too, this is a letter from one of the water management districts where the water management districts would prefer to work with a CD, again, because of our ability to gain capital. Our FEMA emergency response is better. This letter basically says, all things being equal, a CD is a preferred operation and maintenance entity over an association. And in fact, we've gone to like the city of DeLand, north of here. There was a lake, Lake Winnemucet, which is a beautiful lake. There's a property being developed there, and we asked for a CD to be established. And the principal reason that city was willing to do it is because they wanted to have the conservation areas and the stormwater managed by a CDD as opposed to an HOA, because it's a more permanent structure, and also because of its extra capabilities in terms of financing and whatnot. Let's see here. I should point out too, since we're talking to a city, that the CDD does not take on any of the city's responsibilities. The CDD, if you think about it, a lot like an HOA, does the operation and maintenance for the community, and it's sort of the public developer, like it develops the public aspects of the project, but beyond that role and its normal maintenance responsibility, it doesn't really have any other powers of authority. So it's not gonna, make zoning decisions. It's not gonna issue permits and approvals. It's not gonna run a police force. It doesn't do any of those things. It's just a community entity to take care of the infrastructure and help finance it on the front end. You can also see that bullet point. It says a default on the bonds or obligations of a district shall not constitute a debt or obligation of a local general purpose government of the state. Basically, that means that, yeah, CDD can take out a loan, but it's never going to be your all's problem. And we went through the Great Recession, never once in the history of CDDs has a city had to take on a debt or an obligation of a CDD. And we'll speak to default stuff here in just a minute. I do want to answer that question because I'm sure that'll come up. CDD transparency, there's a lot of transparency about CDDs. I would say more so than on an HOA side. For one thing, again, our meetings are public. They're publicly noticed. They're publicly held. We have, when we do our budgets and assessment increases, we send out a mailed notice for the assessment increases in our hearings there. We have to have publicly available websites. Our records can be disclosed. And of course, there's a ton of disclosure in the public record as well. And when people come to buy a home, I was just buying a home myself, actually. You go and you look at the development, you look at the home, and then you turn over and you look at your closing statement, and the CD is listed on there. It's also listed in all the sales literature too, and you can see what the costs are. And so if you like the price and you like the community, then you're going to buy in, and if you don't, you don't have to. So the market kind of takes care of that, but there's a ton of disclosure about CDDs. The establishment criteria is pretty straightforward as well, and we don't have to run through all that right now, but essentially there's 6 criteria, and they're pretty straightforward in terms of getting one established. So I don't want to, I want to take as many questions as you guys have. Do you all have specific questions you want to answer? I don't know how you want to handle the Q&A part.
No, just hang on a second, Brian.
Yeah, do we want to have give public a chance?
I do.
We'll
So
come back.
I wanted to see if you guys wanted to say something before I do
No,
that.
I mean, I've got some questions, but I think
Okay, that's very good. All right, then we'll have, we're going to open it up to the public, see if anybody in the public want to have some questions
Thank
first.
you so much.
And then, is there anyone present in the audience that have questions from the public? None? Do we have anyone on Zoom?
I have one with their hand raised.
All right, thank you, sir. Bring them on.
Hello, Mr. Meckling, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You can go ahead.
Oh, I'm on the horn here.
You are. You're up for questions, sir.
Thank you. Chuck Meckling, 100 Spirit Boulevard. I want to thank the gentleman for his very smooth and slick presentation. And there are 1,000,001 questions that hasn't been raised tonight that would really represent the true reality of these CDD districts. I would look forward to the day that we have our public hearings in front of the city with the full council in support and be able to actually discuss this in depth and have a thorough understanding. There's a lot of things that take place, and I would question many of these comments because they're more of an opinion. I'll give you an example. We were using the example of large projects as the shining star of the CDDs, but at the same time, there was an example that the vast majority of them are very large or very small projects. of the 400 or 500 home range. These are the sort of situations that weren't really thoroughly discussed, but would be part of the reality of passing some sort of legislation on the city level to have this take a part of. So my, for instance, with that is the Indian River County spent months and months, an extensive amount of time looking at CDDs and did put a ordinance in place. They have to be a certain amount of acreage. They have to be able to have a job generation center, a commercial center. They have to have some industrial component to it. They have to be able to prove that they take trips off the road. There's a lot of those sort of things. And I just believe that depending on what the ordinance in the end would say has a varying point. If you're talking something that has 1,000, 2,000 acres, I certainly understand how this would be a mechanism to be able to finance all the infrastructure that take place on that. But again, you take a look to the counties to the south of us, the counties to the north of us, and the CDDs and the unbridled development that takes place. And I'm not against development because I am a developer myself. What I'm against is some of the antics that take place in CDDs. People don't have full disclosure that they're on the hook for 20 or 30 years on their property taxes or on their tax bill that comes in. It's just one of these things that is part of the reality that these take place. And of course, it's not part of the presentation because that would be a negative in regards to passing these things. So I would guard the city in whatever takes place and make sure that we have a variety of public hearings and meetings so that the ordinance or what would be proposed as an ordinance has a full disclosure in front of the council and the residents of Sebastian. That's about my thoughts for the moment. Look forward to more meetings on this and what the vision might be. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that, sir. Do we have anyone else on Zoom?
No one else at this time.
Would anyone like to address anything that was stated?
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. So just a lot of good comments. I think are always happy to talk about CDs. In terms of Indian River County, well, let me back up. The ordinance, there is no ordinance that you need to adopt to have a policy about CDs. In fact, Indian River County did not adopt an ordinance. They do have a policy in place. It does have a 500-acre threshold, but they're probably less than, that may be one of maybe 2 or 3 in the state that has any sort of policy in place. Chapter 190 itself is the legislation that speaks to the establishment of CDs and what the process is. And I think I had the factors up there at the front. So all you need to do is follow Chapter 190 and make a decision on each individual application that comes before you. So you don't need to put a policy in place. Again, I think that people make this bigger than it is. This is really just a community association that takes care of your community a lot like an HOA. So, and I think that's why they're so popular. I mean, people don't hate these things. They buy into them all day long, which is why they are the best-selling communities in Florida. And my point about making, I actually spoke a fair amount about the smaller communities, and that's because that's what most of them are. They're just regular neighborhoods with better capabilities to take care of their road infrastructure and their stormwater ponds. In fact, if you go to places like Marion County and you go to Charlotte County, Clay is like this, Pasco's the same. They didn't set aside, and I don't think most cities and counties have, general tax revenue for roads. And so if you don't have a CDD in place, they will put a special taxing district over your property and make that community pay for its roads. And that's all that we're talking about. These are basically HOA-type structures that have taxing authority so that they can better take care of their infrastructure. It's really not that big of a deal. And the financing aspect is disclosed as part of your closing statement and other documents. I don't know, Phil, if you had things to add.
Yeah, this is Phil Hunt with Rathel Hunt and Associates. For the record, appreciate you letting me come up here for a minute. So, I like to just kind of dumb it down. Really, the CDD has two powers. It does two things. It has the power to finance public infrastructure. It has the power to maintain public infrastructure. That's all we do. Like Jared said a while ago, we don't usurp any of the city powers, permitting, zoning, police, anything like that, entitlement. That's all we do. We finance public infrastructure and we maintain it. And what do we do with the money when we do a bond issue? The money's used generally one of two ways. Certain builders that are targeting the first-time home buyers, they can actually use some of that money to drop the price of their lot and therefore the price of the house. You'll see that sometimes in the first-time home buyer communities. Others, they'll use it for more stuff, more landscaping or water features or amenities or parks or trails, things like that. So that's really what it boils down to. Chuck, it's good to hear your voice again, but I'm going to take issue with something he said, that there's not fair disclosure. The one thing that Florida has done compared to all the other states, we have, over the last 46 years, the law has been on the books. The one thing that gets adjusted every few years is more and more disclosure. As Jared was saying, on the front end, when we create a district, we record that in probate court so it shows up in any title search. After we come back in levy assessments, we record that in probate court. Now that shows up in title searches. And then we issue the bonds, we record something called a notice of public financing. That shows up. Then also, by law, we have to have a public website. Jared referred to that. We have open meetings. We have records and minutes, all of the things like a normal government does. On the purchase contracts, by law, in like the states of Texas and Florida, there's a bold paragraph above the signature block that said, buyer, basically beware, you're buying in the Twin Creeks Improvement District or whatever the name is, and you'll be paying assessments for the next 30 years. It's just disclosure level after disclosure level, and that's a fact. And I'll be happy to answer any questions also.
All right, thank you, sir. Thank you for that. You all can sit down.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Did you all want to say something, Brian, before we ask any questions?
No, I mean, I have a few questions, but I want to give you all the opportunity to ask them just so I don't jump ahead of you and ask questions. But,
all right, that's fine. I've been writing down some stuff, and I know I have some questions. We'll start with Bob online if if you don't mind, Ed. Bob, do you have any questions for them?
No, sir. Good, thank you.
All right. Mr. Dodd, do you have a few questions?
Why not?
Well, I know I have a few, but I just want to give
First,
you.
I'll make a statement. City governments do all of those things you just mentioned, and people still don't understand it. And they still come in here and scream at us every time we tell them we got to raise a fee or raise a tax. So I personally don't believe that those notifications are really as much of a proof that it worked correctly because I've been sitting up here for a long time listening to people do that. We do all of those things, okay, first thing. Now, I have some confusion because of some conversations I've had, maybe even with some people that are, tell me about the possibility of there being parallel organizations, CDD, HMO, for a given development. Is that something that is?
Yes, sir. So there's usually an HOA also with every CDD, because the CDD is a government, it funds public infrastructure, it maintains it, but it doesn't enforce covenants or deed restrictions. That's what the HOAs do. So you will have them for that purpose.
All right, so the HOAs then have absolutely no maintenance responsibilities. They're not required under state statute to have reserves. They're not required to set up any type of accounts for maintenance of facilities, things like that, which they would in an HOA only complex.
That's actually a great question. So what happens, because you have the HOA and because you have the CDD, you now have the choice of, are we going to own and maintain the infrastructure in the CDD, or do we want to put it over in the HOA? So they could be either or, and we have developers that put as much as they can in the HOA and others that do as much as they can in the CDD. But at the end of the day, they know that the debt assessment plus the HOA fee plus the CDD O&M is what people are looking at when they're shopping. They got to look at all three of them together.
Well, I I don't want to disagree with you too adamantly, but I will tell you, people don't listen to that until they get their first bill. A lot of people don't listen to that before they get their first. I know there's probably every effort in a sales pitch to make sure people understand you're going to get another $500 bill every month to pay all of these debts off, and they're going to say, I love this house. Okay, so the big problem from my perspective is making sure that people, I don't want people coming to me and screaming, you approve this CDD and now I'm bankrupt because I can't pay their fees. So that's just, that's the whole concept. But let me get on to my questions. Okay, so is there a typical turnover process between the CDD and the HOA? How does that step take place? Because I actually downloaded a piece of legislation, 190.
Yeah.
And like all legislation, it's written for people who don't know how to read it and can't figure out what's in it. I didn't go to law school, so I can't do that kind of stuff. But I don't see anything in there that talks about. I see stuff in there that talks about the termination of a CDD, the termination of the debt, what happens. How does that transition take place between the CDD and the HOA?
So with an HOA community, I think y'all probably know, when you get to 95% build out, it's written into your covenants that it'll basically, the whole board will turn over. So toward the end of the project, your infrastructure's in, you reach a certain population, boom, it's done. The CDD works a little differently. A CDD has a 5-member board of supervisors. In the early years, every 2 years you have an election, and the seats are staggered. So you might have 2 seats up in one election, and maybe the next one you got 3 seats up, and so they kind of turn over like that. And those seats that are coming up in the early years are actually governed by landowner elections. So if you own 50% of the land within that community, or 51%, you basically win the election, right? So it could be a much earlier turnover than a 90% build out, which means you could have residents on quite a bit earlier in a CDD than in an HOA. The other type of election that happens in the early years, every 2 years, you got these landowner elections. When you get to year 6, if you have 250 residents living there who are registered voters, those seats that are turning over start to go on the regular election ballot. And so they'll be filled by what's called qualified electors. They have to be residents of the community at that point. The nice thing about the statute as compared to the HOA ways governed is that, one, you're more likely to get earlier turnover. And when you start to get turnover, oftentimes you'll have residents on the board at the same time as developers, which is great because the residents, you've probably gone through a HOA turnover before, a lot of times they don't know what's going on, right? And so if you have the developer on there with the residents, they can kind of understand what's going on, they can have a smoother handoff, they can kind of work together, and the transition actually works. I mean, the statute's set up to have that kind of transitionary period.
Okay, so, but I'm still trying to understand. Yeah. You got the CDD, they sell the bonds. I mean, I drew a little schematic. In my world, I came from engineers draw schematics.
Sure.
Okay, so the CDD is established, they establish a board, they issue bonds, they generate revenue, they begin to build infrastructure. You got a X acre complex with X number of houses and hopefully maybe a little bit of amenities. And they begin to build that infrastructure. It's my understanding that there is a possibility that the CDD will do the infrastructure to a given point, and then the HOA would complete that infrastructure. That's not the case?
No, the HOA typically doesn't do any development. The only thing an HOA typically does is the operation and maintenance part.
So but the CDD then can, at what point in time, this is something I couldn't find. At what point in time will the CDD make a transition from maintenance between themselves and the HOA?
It never does. The CDD just continues maintaining its stuff.
So the CDD will always, in perpetuality, be responsible for maintaining that infrastructure.
Correct. And it's one of the benefits because it's much less likely to sunset. Like an HOA can sunset and then there's nobody to take care of that stuff.
So the HOA is going to have a fee structure that is purely for the purpose of them
operation,
of them enforcing the covenants that are, I mean, getting mad at people because they're just staying inside their house and their sprinklers and do all those kinds of things.
Exactly.
They're not going to have any type of a financial structure that they do through their assessments for maintenance of any of the facilities within the complex.
Again, it goes back to Phil's comment. You can set them up a little differently each way, but it's not that they cross over and they do the same things. It's that they're doing different buckets. So, for example, I'm just going to give you the 3 typical scenarios. One scenario is the CDD owns a clubhouse and basically everything else at the community, right? And the only thing that the HOA does is the architectural control on the houses. That's one scenario. The other scenario is a little bit switched, where the CD maybe did a small bond and they're just owning the stormwater infrastructure, and maybe they finance the utilities and they turn the utility system over to the city, which is very typical. But the clubhouse and the rest of the stuff, the landscape entry, whatever, is owned by the HOA. That's another scenario. And then there's kind of a middle one where you kind of, I don't know, maybe more of it, maybe the CDD does the landscaping in the main boulevard, and plus, you know, maybe they also own the clubhouse, but maybe there's a gated area within the community and that's run by the HOA. So there's different kind of mixes of those two extremes, if that makes sense.
Well, then another way to think about it is the CDD generally finances and maintains governmental things or things public, open to the public, whereas the HOA is owning and maintaining things that are private, like a clubhouse.
So the CDD might build the clubhouse. I'm just saying it. They may build the clubhouse because they want the amenity there so they can sell houses, or the process, but then they could turn that clubhouse over to the HOA to maintain and.
Not typically. Once they
typically.
pay for it using federal tax money, it's going to be,
So the
they
CDD
have legal responsibility for it going forward.
So we separate, like they do with utilities, public and private side.
That's exactly
Okay,
right.
so the public
Yes, sir.
side CDD, private
That's
side
exactly
HOA.
right.
Okay?
Yep.
So public and private side
As
HOA.
a matter of fact, in the engineering report on the front end, to your world, we have an engineer's report, and it basically shows the public, the private, and who will own and maintain each item.
So once the loan payments, let's assume that at some point in time in our lifetime, in somebody's lifetime, all of these bond issues are paid off, which everybody would like to see, but most people don't ever really see. What happens to the CDD?
It continues on as a perpetual maintenance entity. And we do have some CDs that have paid off their debt. Either they paid off early or they've been around for 30 years and it's gone through that cycle too, so.
Okay. All right. And then this is a question that I'll have to talk to our attorney about, because what happens if the CDD actually does go bankrupt and folds?
Right, that's
What
my
happens?
question.
How does the city?
Yeah.
Because, you know, no matter what we say, the city has a responsibility to people that live within the boundaries of the city, so.
It's a great question. I sort of touched on a little bit on the slide, but I never really answered it. And Phil will have a more robust answer than I do, but just to get you started, you know, any project can fail. If you just have a regular project with an HOA on it, or you can have a CDD project, either one of them can fail. The legislature, when they created Chapter 190, though, one of the things they built into the statute is sort of these default procedures, which actually makes it a better project if there is a recessionary environment. And the reason is, when you issue the CDD debt, for one thing, the money isn't sitting in the developer's pocket, right? It is actually sitting in a trust estate bank, U.S. Bank or Regions Bank are probably the two biggest trustee banks that hold this money. The money can only be accessed through a requisition process that's signed off on by a manager, by an engineer, who's signed off saying that these are going for proper purposes. And so there's a check and balance there. Also, the money's in that bond account, and so it's there to finish out the phase of the project that you're working on. So if you didn't have that money there and you have a default, the developer gives up, the money's gone, the project just sits there. If you have the CDD issue debt, you actually have money typically for the first phase. So that money's there. And then there's also some special money in what's called a reserve account. That reserve money can be used if there's a foreclosure on a large piece of property because someone's not paying their assessment, which is kind of your point. They can use that reserve money to keep your amenity center open, to continue to water the grass, keep the landscaping cut. And you're also going through a foreclosure that's a foreclosure of a first priority governmental lien, co-equal with taxes. And so the advantage there is you get through foreclosure more quickly. And we saw during the Great Recession, there were a small percentage of projects that failed, both CD and HOA. And the CD ones actually outperformed in terms of getting back into productive use more quickly. What would happen is you'd go through that foreclosure process. Vast majority of them were done in like 6 to 12 months. And you could park it in a special purpose entity controlled by the district's bondholders. When the market recovered, they sold it off. I'll let Phil speak to it.
Let me just jump in real quick.
Yeah, go ahead, buddy.
So in 2008, there were a lot of defaults, and we learned more in the bad times than we learned in the good times. So what we did was we went through the foreclosure process. And what happens, you'll read these articles that said a CDD failed. no CDD ever failed in this state. A project might have failed, a developer might have gone bankrupt. The CDDs, we found out, performed as they should. What happened is the bondholders, Goldman Sachs, Nuveen, and those guys stepped in. They had a first priority lien, like a tax lien. They stepped in, they foreclosed, they got the property back, cleaned it up, sold it to subsequent developers. Here we are years later, we're out of inventory. But it worked as it was supposed to, and we learned a lot of that through 2008.
And you had similar projects that were HOA with mortgage on them that sat there because the banker didn't have any cash to do anything with it.
Right.
And it really, they just sat there much longer.
Okay, all right. I can thoroughly understand why a developer wants to do a CDD. It allows them to finance through tax-exempt bonds the infrastructure for a project, sell the property at a reduced price because they don't have to build that infrastructure cost into the property charges. They don't have to sell a lot for $190,000. They can sell it for $140,000 or whatever the number is. Getting in the house is cheaper. They're able through the CDD to do something that, quite frankly, we can't do as a city because we couldn't get our residents to approve it. They can give incentives to buyers, which I heard you say. I have some questions about what happens if, I get the CDD board has to approve that, which means that the rest of the people living in the CDD have to pay those, have to make up those differences in some way or another. But they can do some things that maybe a city can't do. So I can understand why a developer wants to do a CDD. I still think about it from the perspective of somebody. I've lived through the savings and loan debacles. I'm kind of an old guy. I've seen a lot of that stuff. And a lot of these fancy mechanisms over time have cost a lot of individuals to lose a lot of money because they bought into them. So that's my primary concern, is that. And so I'll have to work my way through that.
Yeah, the other thing too, I'd be happy to introduce you to, we represent a lot of developer clients, but we also represent a lot of residential projects that have been around a long time. They got their bonds paid off and whatnot. I'll give you the phone numbers of the chairmen who are on those boards because they really do like their CDD. And the reason they like them is because they can do more things with them. In fact, I had a project down in Southwest Florida. This is a couple of years ago now, I'm trying to remember. But it was a smaller project. I think it had 190 homes in it. And they gave me a call and they said, hey, look, we got an HOA, we got a CDD. Would you come down and tell us how to dissolve the CDD? Because we don't really need two administrative entities because it's a smaller project, right? I said, okay, fine. So I go down there. I tell them what the process is to dissolve the CDD. They list all the reasons, not all of them, but a lot of the reasons and benefits of it. Like the audits came out, all their neighbors came out and they said, we want to keep the CD for all the reasons you're talking about. And sure enough, the next year, they ended up, they didn't want to fight because the community was pretty harmonious, and so they just let it go. But the next year, a hurricane came through, and because they had their CDD, they got FEMA funding, and I think they ended up doing another project later, like the residents did, and they kept their CD place. The CD is still in place today. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. But no, so literally.
Our CDD police was walking out here telling you.
Yeah.
Right. But my point is, like, I'd be happy to introduce you to some of the folks who work with. They really do like them. And the reason is because you can do more stuff for your community. Okay. It's like I've got a community in, well, it's my community I live in. We have septic tanks, and we need money for utilities infrastructure and roads and things like that. We can't raise the capital because we're an HOA. And I think I gave you the example earlier where I have people actually call me trying to get CDs established on existing projects because all of a sudden they've been in flood zones or something like that. So anyway, there's definitely some advantages, and a lot of the residents they really like them.
We can't raise that capital and we're a city, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
thank you, sir.
yeah, no, that's a lot of this stuff has been answered that I want to talk about. But one thing I do want to ask, and it was, to me, it appears that it was glossed over at the beginning, and that's under the summary of benefits when we talk about CDDs won't sunset. Can CDDs sunset? Have they sunsetted before? Because it was said that they won't sunset like an HOA, but there is a possibility, and those things do happen. That's what I want to hear.
Yeah, so that is a good question. HOAs are a little different in that they have like a term, and then if you don't take certain actions, it can literally go away, right? We're familiar with that sunset process. CDDs don't have anything similar to that. What they do have, though, is if you don't have someone filing your annual reports and doing what you need to do, it'll flag folks up in Tallahassee to take some action, and so it can get dissolved that way. But that's the only similar sort of sunset. It's not that there's an automatic sunset. It's if the reports stop getting filed, people aren't paying attention, regulators will step in. So it's a little different type of
So
sunset.
if the regulators don't step in or they don't see it in time, I mean, what happens if it does
Can't
sunset?
they voluntarily dissolve after all the debt's paid off and
They
transfer the
can.
assets to HOA?
Yeah. So that's, in fact, that's the community I was talking about earlier. We don't get these requests too often, but I did have that one. There is a process. You know, after your bond debt's paid off, you could transfer the assets to an HOA, and you can go through a dissolution process. So that is a possibility. So if residents, like, they get their bond debt paid off and they're not happy with the CD, they can terminate it.
And then what happens with the infrastructure? Then that falls back on the.
It would go to the HOA. They have to transfer it to the HOA in order to do the dissolution.
There'd have to be an agreement between
Yeah.
the CDD and the HOA.
Yeah, and that's what was being proposed at that one in Southwest Florida I was mentioning.
Yeah, the trigger is because it's tax exempt bond financing. You know, it can't be transferred to a private HOA while bonds are outstanding. Once they're paid off, then they could talk to the HOA about taking over and dissolving the CDD. That's how you do it.
But there's no auto sunset like there is with an HOA.
I hear you. Well, that's fine. I had one other question. I've lost my train of thought right now, but it was,
Mayor, while you're thinking about it, I got a
yeah,
question.
go
and
ahead,
I'll
Brian.
give you a few minutes.
Yep.
So we've talked about what happens if you start the development and nothing really happens and you go into foreclosure and things like that. But what happens if you've started a development and you've got 50% capacity, 49%, let's use 49 so we don't reach that threshold of property owner takeover type situation. 49% capacity, and all of a sudden the market just tanks. Are you now going to increase the assessments on the tax bill to those 49% of developed properties to make up for it because you're no longer going to be able to develop the other 51% of the community?
No, that's a great question, and that's the difference, one of the differences between HOAs and CDDs. So when we come in, let's say it's a phased project, you got two phases. You're in the middle of the first phase and the thing goes into default. All we can assess is the amount of the assessments that were in the assessment methodology report that backed the bond issue. That's all we can charge. And let's say you got 10 people in there that are dutifully paying their assessments. We can't foreclose on those guys. We can foreclose on the developers' lots who isn't paying. And they can't legally increase assessments. And one reason they can is because on the front end, we've issued bonds, we've locked in the assessment. It's a 30-year amortization like a mortgage. That's the assessment level for the next 30 years for the debt. That's all locked in.
It's also benefit-based, so you can only charge them for the, yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
It's also benefit-based, so you can only charge them for the level of benefit they're getting. And just because you got some people aren't paying, doesn't mean that people in the first 10 homes got more benefit, right? You can't go back and charge them more.
So to kind of build off that question, because you just brought up a little bit different. So it's benefit-based. The benefit is you've installed complete infrastructure, complete roads for the entire development up front. You just haven't built the homes. So the benefit is complete. So you still, there's no way that you're now going to piggyback off the initial assessment. So let's use this as an easy number. When you ran your numbers initially and you went and you got the tax exempt bond and you had 100 properties, and you figured out that the bond was going to be equal to $1,000 a year for 30 years on every one of those 100 properties. You're telling me that there's no way you're going to charge any of those properties more than $1,000 for 30 years?
That's exactly what happened in 2008. We cannot charge more, and what happens is the bondholders came in and foreclosed non-paying lots, and those that paid were left alone. We cannot increase it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So what is the mechanism to increase it? Say we're built out, say we're 100%. And you now have to increase it because we're built out, we're 13 years down the road, and I now need to repave a street.
It's a separate issue.
So you just told me you don't have an option to increase it, do an additional assessment, but now we're forced to. Is that a possibility to increase it?
So at that
certain
point,
point.
13 years in, the board is now controlled by all the residents. And at that point, the first bond issue is set. Now, the residents as a community, like a city, can vote if they want to increase their own assessments and borrow more money.
Okay.
But the developer's long gone, that's between the residents, is a majority vote.
And an HOA would have to do the same thing. I mean, if they're having to fix up their roads 13 years in, somebody's got to pay for it. And so that's a new thing you're paying for, and then the residents would pay for it.
Well, and frankly, that's one reason these residents like it, because now all of a sudden they can borrow at tax exempt rates. Today's rates, 30 years fixed rate is about 5.6%. It's a pretty good deal.
And if it's a surprise, with an HOA, you get that balloon assessment, right? Whereas if it's a CD, they can actually get a loan and spread the cost over a period of time. So it's a lot better for the CD.
I've got a few more.
No, go ahead. You just hit the point of mine. I think Mr. Dodd is probably going to follow up on that, but you can go ahead.
Do you want to follow up on it? And then I got a different subject.
It was an interesting question because I saw something about another one of these schematics, HOA, multiple CDDs. Is that done where there is phase development within, and where you want to build the infrastructure for a phase one and then do infrastructure for phase two and finance that separately?
Was it possibly multiple HOAs? Because sometimes you'll have a big developer sell two pods, one to D.R. Horton, one to Lennar, one to Pulte, and they have their own HOAs.
Yeah, okay,
We
but
do
if
have that.
I understand that, but if I'm going to develop a piece of property, and I know we're not talking about 200-acre pieces of property when we talk about this. These are larger developments than 200 or 300 acres, because chances are really good you're going to put all the infrastructure in for that whole 200-acre project. But
There are a couple, there's not a lot of communities like that, but there are a couple where it's a large development like you're talking about, and maybe it's got 6 pieces like the Veranos, for example. It's got 6 different CDDs, but each piece is huge, right? And so some of those, there's multiple HOAs depending on where you're at, but I think there is a master that covers some of it. Vieira is a little bit like that as well.
Okay.
But that's pretty rare.
But the reason that happens is it was probably a 20 or 25-year development time frame.
Okay, yeah.
Every 6 years might be a new CDD.
Yeah.
That's when you see that.
And so the developer basically comes in, sets up a CDD, sells the property to builders,
Yes,
whether
sir.
it's a large chunk or, I mean, I lived in a gated community at one point in time before I moved to Florida that every individual lot was owned by builders all over the place because they wanted it that way. Architecturally, they didn't want houses to look the same. They wanted all different structures. Okay. They sell it to the builder. The builder now is obligated to pay his CDD assessment to cover the cost of the infrastructure. So until they sell all the lots, and I think this goes with Brian's question, until they sell all the lots to builders, what mechanism do they do to pay the CDD loan payments for those lots that are not sold?
So once those lots are platted, we as a CDD manager, we're keeping the assessment rolls. So every year the assessment bill is going out to whoever the owner of record is. Hey, if it's Pulte, D.R. Horton, Lennar, they're the ones getting the bill and paying the bill.
But if it's Joe Blow who develops it and he's intending to sell that 200 houses to Pulte and 200 to somebody else and 200 to somebody else, and he hasn't sold all of those lots yet, and it's the first payment on the note is due, does that get spread?
That bill goes to Joe Blow.
Yeah, he's got to pay it.
Joe
bill
Blow
goes to Joe
developer,
Blow.
yep.
Okay, so that's what I was, okay.
Yeah,
So-
again, that's what we do, like a tax collector's office, because we interface with them. Is the lots are changing hands, we're doing the estoppel letters with the title companies and keeping record who the owners are. And whatever the owners are, that the list at that end of the year, some of the bills are going to home buyers, some are going to home builders, and some might be going to Joe Blow developer.
Okay.
The only, and I don't want to get too technical. If I'm going too much in the weeds, y'all just tell me to stop.
I don't want to do that.
I was going to talk
I
about.
don't want to get too far in the
Were you going
weeds.
to talk
I love
about
the
capitalized
weeds.
interest?
Yeah, me too.
All right.
Go ahead.
We
Well,
like the
I was
weeds.
just going to say, a lot of times in the bond deals, while they're doing the initial construction for the first phase, there's what's called capitalized interest. And it's basically, it could either be construction money that the developer's using, but instead they want to use it to pay that first payment. So they'll set aside part of that debt for that purpose too, just to get them through the construction phase. But that was the only exception I can think of to what you're talking about.
And in the case that Brian was talking about, where you've got 13 years down the line, you're going to do maintenance on streets, that's a separate bond issue.
Correct.
And that bond issue is assessed just like the original bond issue was.
And it's voted on by the citizens.
So you're going to have separate bond issues for those things to take
Correct.
place, right? So
That's
now
exactly right.
the question, and I can understand from a city manager's point of view, he comes back with, what if the CDE board says, I'm not going to do it? And there's, there's nothing, the statute says they do maintenance, but the statute has no penalties if they don't do maintenance.
Well, it's just like a homeowners association. You can have good people running an HOA and it works great.
And the stories I read are all about bad people running.
Yeah, exactly. And you have good people running CDs, that works great too.
Yeah, good people never get press.
Yeah, but the CD is going to give you a little extra, and then if things go badly, the CD is much better able to recover. So if you have a bad board, bad CD board, you vote them out and put in a new set.
I understand, but I mean, in the case of an HOA, if Brian sees, I mean, we've got some HOAs inside the city that are responsible for maintaining streets.
Right.
And if the city sees that those streets are not being maintained, then we can take legal action against that against that HOA. I'm not sure under 190 that we can take legal action against the CDD.
Well,
you could talk about the agreement on the front end, petitioner.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. If you all want to, we could enter into an agreement with your CDD on the front end, so you know what the responsibilities are, and you kind of lock that down. We do a lot of interlocal agreements between CDs and cities all the time, and so that's definitely something to give you that legal right that you're looking for.
Okay.
Is that something that we can also, because we do this, have it on the plat, the final plat, have
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
inscribed on the final
Yeah.
plat, what those requirements are and how that all entails?
Yeah, or reference it. We'll talk to your all's attorney about how you want to paper it, but yeah, I don't see why you couldn't.
And is it common when you establish a CDD, let's say somebody comes into Sebastian and says, we want to do a CDD and we agree that the CDD is the right thing. Is it common to do a parallel development of the HOA's bylaws and articles of corporation so that they are codified at the time the CDD is codified?
I haven't seen cities and counties do that, but a lot of times when they're doing their permitting, all that stuff actually happens earlier. So for example, when you're getting your water management district permit, you got to submit the HOA covenants, and they'll submit that with their Chapter 190 stuff too. So I think all that does happen concurrently. I don't see it on the agendas for the cities, whether you see them both at the same time, but that work is going on at the same time for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if this was stated earlier, but up front it said the tax exempt bond for some of the infrastructure. You stated some of the infrastructure. I wanted to clarify that and what you meant by some of the infrastructure on the tax exempt bond.
That's a great question. So one of the things that the developer has to sign with the bondholders is a completion guarantee. So let's say that phase one is going to have $20 million worth of public infrastructure in the engineer's report. So we can only do, let's say, 10 million in bonds that net them about 10 million. Well, they've got to show the financial wherewithal to Wall Street. They've got the other 10 million to finish the public infrastructure for that phase. At the end of the day, Wall Street's security are finished platted lots. So they want to make dang sure that developer's got the money to finish the rest of the pipes and the roads to go with the bond money Wall Street's giving them. So that's part of the game. That's how it works.
All right,
So
Ms. Benton, go
real
ahead.
quick, just to piggyback off that, so what you're saying is the developer can't take out 100% tax exempt bonds?
Correct. And you know why? Because the market cannot bear that high of an assessment. Florida's evolved with 1,100 CDDs right now. We'll give you the comps for every market. And you can see what level of assessment generally for a 40, 50, 60-foot lot is kind of the market norm. So, kind of a common one would be, say, $30 per front foot per year. So on a 50-foot lot times 30, $1,500 assessment, okay? If you come in and say, man, I need to borrow all of this money, and the assessment's going to be $5,000 a year, well, you're not going to sell any houses, and Wall Street's not going to buy the bond. So it's a self-regulating Wall Street thing. That's the other thing is the buyers, Goldman Sachs, Nuveen, Franklin, names that they know the Florida market. So when you come to market and you bring an offering that's got assessments twice as high as the rest of the market, they're not going to buy the bonds. It's a self-regulating thing.
Just to give you a kind of a ballpark idea, your capital stack, maybe you need $80,000 or $100,000 per lot to develop it. Maybe $15,000 to $20,000 is actually the CDD money. So there's a lot of capital that the developer still puts in out of their own pocket. Yeah.
All right, Mr. Ben.
So another one, kind of going back to something you mentioned earlier when you were talking about the potential for a CDD to fail. And I've heard this said, and I kind of want to walk through it a little bit. If a CDD fails, say, for this sake, let's say we're close to build out, and the CDD fails somehow, some way, can that be turned over? Not to say we want this, but I'm asking for theoretical questions. Can that be turned over to the city so that there is still an assessment mechanism on the tax bill for the city to handle the infrastructure improvements if the CDD goes under?
So I'm going to answer my way, and I'll let him answer. In '08, we did not see a CDD fail. A project failed or a developer failed, but a CDD was the governmental entity that still collected the assessments, paid the bills, maintained the project. So I hear the hypothetical question, but we've not seen a CDD fail. It's, like I said, project, developer, somebody not paying their bills, that type stuff. But you just come in and foreclose those properties.
Yeah, I think that's the answer. If you wanted to get creative about it, I'm pretty sure, check with your all's internal counsel, but I think you all can come in and put in place your own dependent special taxing district behind it. So that's another thing Pasco County does that all day long with neighborhoods that don't have CDs. They'll put those MSTUs.
Well, that's what I was going to say is it's actually funny because over time, and a lot of this happened, I think, after '08 because a lot of HOAs were having trouble. And, to your point earlier, in an HOA, you got to raise the dues maybe if somebody's not paying, not in a CDD. But you've got places like Marion County that basically demand developers use a special taxing district so they don't get burdened with the maintenance of a failed HOA and roads. So I know Marion County's one. There's a few other, Pasco.
They're all like that.
Yeah, so it's kind of flips the argument. I mean, these counties are demanding a CDD or another comparable MSBU to fund it and maintain it because it's such a good mechanism.
Hey, can we get a second mic over there just in case, because when the other one talks, it's not getting out, right? And there is one, so, yeah.
Look on the bottom, yeah, right underneath there. There should be a handheld.
Oh, now they can tag team.
Yeah, well, they were tag team and just wasn't hearing it well, so,
Testing.
yeah.
I'll make him get up in front. I'll get it.
Okay, there you go. Make him get up there then.
And don't touch the mic now.
Yeah. Are you finished, Mr. Mayor?
Right now, I don't have anything. That's all the questions I had written down, but if you guys have
All right.
additional ones.
Did you need anything from? No? All right.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
I think we do need to hear about a couple things. One is about whether these communities are going to be gated and closed to the public, considering the roads are being paid for by tax dollars. And I believe they have a theory behind this, and I'm not necessarily sure I agree with that theory, but I think we probably need to have that discussion because it becomes important, especially as they're talking about using this public money for parks and community centers too. That's a lot of public infrastructure that by state law has to be open to the public. And yet I also heard talk about gated communities. So I think that we need to hear about that.
Yeah, so the simple answer on that is, excellent question, because it does come up. It's literally a matter of federal tax law. If you issue bonds, use tax exempt money, public money, behind a hard gated community where if you drive up and you cannot get in that gate, the only things that we're able to finance behind those gates are stormwater utilities, which is basically stormwater ponds, your stormwater system, and then your water sewer reclaim. Those are the only things that we can finance. And of course, the water sewer reclaim ultimately gets turned over to the city as public infrastructure. And then the CD would just maintain the stormwater ponds. Generally speaking, that's worth about $20,000 a lot. So that'll empty out your bond account. So it works with gated communities. That's the hard gated communities, and Phil's going to throw something at me, but I'll make it more complicated. So the other type of gate you can have is what's called a soft gate. And the idea there is, if you've heard of like Envera system or something like that, it's like a remote monitored gate system where there's a remote virtual gate guard. You drive up to the gate. It has a visual deterrent because the gate's there. It's also taking camera photos of the people coming and going. So it does have a little measure of security, but you can't keep people out. And the standing gate orders are, if someone drives up and they say, hey, I want in, you've got to open the gate, and the gate guard will let them in. And so we do have that soft gate concept that effectively converts the roads to public roads. So.
Well, that sounds troubling to me. Listen, there's nobody from the general public is going to just drive up to a community like that and say, let me in. I want to come in because I want to see what's there. That's generally not going to happen.
Well, and the other part of it too, I mean, we're talking about stormwater ponds, so there's not really like a good reason for people to drive into other people's neighborhoods to use the stormwater pond, right? People don't really do that. But now, if you have like an amenity or something like that, then you want to make sure that people have access to the amenity and things like that. But I don't know of a lot of places that have hard or soft gated gates and then also have an amenity.
So are you saying that the streets are not built with the tax exempt bond money?
In a gated community, the answer is no. That's exactly
Yes,
right.
right.
So that's what I was going to step up.
That's-
You got a great question. So depending on whether you're gated or not is what we can publicly finance behind the gate. And there is a difference. So that's a great question.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
Then one other question is well, two questions. But it
get
both
three.
deals with your boards and the meetings. One of the things that I've seen and I've dealt with CDDs everywhere I've been. Initially, when the developer controls all the seats of the CDD, there's usually, at the very least, a suspicion, if not fact, that there's sunshine problems, because the developer is building this community. And to say that 5 members of that development team are board members but aren't talking at all about that development at work just doesn't seem to pass the smell test to most people as to how you keep that. So who would you anticipate being those initial board members, and how do you keep them from making sure all their conversations are in the public?
Yeah, that's a great question. And over the years, we kind of agree with you. So a lot of what we'll tell folks to do is you might put one person from the development team on the board, or, one person from the back office. And after that, it's other people that are not related to the actual day-to-day development, just for that reason. So that's a great question. And that's how you handle it.
And the statute allows us to pay each supervisor $200 a meeting. So there's like some retirees and stuff that actually serve on some of these developer boards. So that fills some of the seats for us too.
And then the last one would be, where do you anticipate your board meetings being? This is another common complaint, is that you have a little development here in Sebastian, but your board meetings are a 2-hour drive away or whatever. Where would you?
Well,
and I realize that there are some limitations, but even like you look at like Brevard County, which is like 2-hour drive from north to south border, and yet a development at South End, they'll say, well, their meeting's going to be all the way up in Mims or something. I mean, what do you anticipate if you did anything?
What
here in
our
Sebastian?
policy is that we do it by jurisdiction. So if we create it in the city of Sebastian, we do it in the city limits of Sebastian. So, my administrative lady generally deals with, the city folks and the developer says, okay, let's pick a public place. Are we renting the Holiday Inn, conference room, or, going to the city public library? We do that a lot. So, that's open for whatever people want.
And we've got cities too, where we've done some of those interlocals, and we'll put that actually in the interlocal. And so meet in the city of Lake Alfred every time. So.
And yeah, the notifications with that as well. Where does the notifications go for the public meeting?
Well, they run on the website, so that's one place that they run.
Of the CDD?
Yes, sir. And then they'll also run in a newspaper of general circulation.
Right,
so.
as the state law requires,
Yes,
right?
sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I don't know if anyone reads newspapers, but yeah.
All right. Hang on a second, see if they may have something else here, but.
Bob just arrived.
Yeah, so Bob got tired of listening on Zoom, so he wanted to come in and see you all face to face, so.
I'm glad we piqued your interest.
I left Okeechobee when the meeting started.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I was able to make it. My daughters were playing tennis out there, and they won, which was great.
Good.
I've been listening. You guys had some great questions. And you know, my grandmother always taught me, my mother told me, you know, if it's too good to be true, I have not heard one thing negative. Now, the one thing you mentioned was in most cases, the CDD could get FEMA reimbursement. What are the ones they can't get FEMA reimbursement?
Yeah, so you mentioned some of the shortcomings, and let's talk about those too, right? I mean, that's kind of one of your questions. But on the FEMA reimbursement, FEMA is a stubborn beast. If you've ever done FEMA reimbursement work, first of all, it can be very expensive to hire the consultants and stuff to get that done. So you're going to do it on the larger damage storms or whatnot, right? And if you have a hard-gated CDD, we have gotten some FEMA funding in some of those places, depending on the year we were applying. And then for other storms, they were taking a different position, saying, hey, if you have a hard-gated community, we're not going to treat it like it's public for purposes of FEMA funding. I honestly think a lot of it has to do with the administration that's in place at the time and also how much money they've got at that time too. So
They won't fund inside of a gated community right
Nope.
now.
we've had that trouble. But I've got one, I'm not going to name names, but I got one that did get some money too, that's gated. So.
Well, and let me jump in. One of the downsides really is the whole nature of this thing. If we're charging assessments, right, and it's above and beyond what all the neighborhoods nearby are, you know, you've got to sell that community. You got to sell why you have assessments. Why are you paying more to live here? And to the extent that the developer can't do that, he's going to start discounting either his assessments or the sales price on the house. So that's a downside.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the other part is when the storms come in, though, when we get these storms come in, if you have a lot of damaged trees down and everything else, is the CDD going to have enough money to do what they need to do for the storm?
Yeah, I mean, look, to your point, you know, there's no perfect structure, right? The CDD just gives you a few more tools. And so we had, for example, we've had communities get hit by a big storm. They'll get some FEMA money, and then some stuff isn't covered by FEMA, so they got to take out a bank loan for 5 years or something like that. But if you didn't have the CDD, you'd have an HOA, they wouldn't get any FEMA money, and then they'd also have to deal with trying to not, you know, they'd have to do a one-time balloon assessment. So it's not like there's a perfect structure, it's just a better structure than an HOA.
And then the other one I heard is no CDDs have ever failed. It's the project that failed. Okay, in those instances when the project failed, how long did it take for the bondholders to foreclose on them, and what was the impact at that time on the cities where they were?
Go ahead.
There was no impact on the cities, their debt ratings or debt capacity whatsoever. These are totally standalone, you know, quasi-governmental entities. So if you talk to S&P, Moody's, Fitch, the rating agencies, no city's ever been dinged or downgraded because of a default of a developer financing. How long did it take? I mean, it was the court process, you know, for foreclosures. I think it was probably a couple of years, wasn't it?
Well, no, actually, most of them would go through in 6 to 12 months because the developer basically just hand off the property. You'd file that foreclosure complaint. It's a first priority foreclosure. Goes through pretty quick. The ones that were heavily contested, and there were a couple ugly ones, they could take a couple of years, just like any mortgage foreclosure. So, but it's a better foreclosure process because one, you got money to fund it, which is in that reserve account, and two, you're foreclosing a first priority lien. So again, it ain't perfect, but it's better than the alternative.
And I understand there was no impact on the city, but Mr. Dodd had mentioned, once they're in here, they're our residents. So if there's like the 10 people that are left, and it takes 2 or 3 years, and, you know, they come here. You know, and again, we don't want to just leave them in the lurch. And also, you know, when we had all the foreclosures in the early 2000s here, a lot of those properties, they sat for years, you know.
What happened is actually it moved pretty quickly because the trustee bank on behalf of the bondholders had the money that was left over in the reserve funds and things like that. So they stepped in and basically helped maintain the project. You know, I can't remember the name of it. There was one project I went to down in Cape Coral, and it was maybe 50 residents and hundreds of defaulted lots. But they had a very well-maintained community until it sold out many years later.
And you're sort of making our point, too, because you said that there were foreclosures down here too that lasted and they sat for a long time. Those are not CDD communities, presumably, because you don't have CDDs down here. So what I'm saying is you can have either type of project fail. It's just the CDD has the bond trustee, they've got the reserve money, and they got the first priority lien, so the foreclosure is better and there's cash to actually get it done.
Yeah, and that was my concern with the storm stuff when I was speaking of that. Those are our residents, and if the CDD can't handle a massive amount of damage or whatever, then what are we going to have to do for those residents in our city? So,
Right. And just very quickly, CDDs have much more ability to finance than HOAs. I mean, HOAs can go to a bank, but bank loans have short terms, and CDDs can borrow for 30 years, keep the payments very low. It's just better financing with tax-exempt bonds.
all right, Mr. Benton?
Another question popped in my head while we were talking about stormwater and looking at that. What is
Don't touch the mic.
He's the HOA cop.
in the CDD? I know you have a board that's 5 members that you said you could pay $200 a meeting. What other staff do you have that would fall on the backs of those residents?
So it looks pretty similar to a city. My company, for instance, is a CDD manager, so we're like the de facto city manager, tax collector, tax assessor office rolled into one. They have a CDD attorney, which is like a city attorney. So that's basically, and then they also have a CDD engineer. So that's basically the staff. That's it.
Yeah, most HOAs also have a manager and lawyer. Typically, they generally don't have an engineer, though. They probably need one, to be honest with you, if they're maintaining infrastructure long term. But we find having our engineers on hand is pretty helpful.
Is that with the record keeping on that too? Talk about the.
Oh, yeah, and you also have someone who serves like as a clerk for your record.
That's us, the manager too. So it's all the books and records. We have to do audits annually, annual budgets, all of that type of stuff like a city would.
Yeah, the statute covers all that. Yeah. They have the same basic reporting requirements that we do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're a mini city. Well, the CDD becomes a mini city.
Well, and that's why I said at the beginning, it may look like a mini city, but we have 2 powers: the power to finance infrastructure, power to maintain it, and that's it. We don't usurp any other powers of city, county, utility boards, nothing like that.
All right. I think that's it for me. Mr. Stokes, do you have anything else? Thank you. All right. Anything else for me?
Well, this has been a very unusual meeting because of the structure of it, but it was very helpful.
Yes.
And I'm hoping some people out there that are not part of Sebastian that may be listening to this, because these kinds of educational things are very good. They're very good for us. I mean, as we get people come in and bring in applications for a CDD, it gives us a little bit more insight in how to review those, as well as insight in how we want to structure an ordinance, because we need to have an ordinance on the CDDs.
Yeah. So. All right, you guys, is there anyone from the public wanting to speak on anything that we spoke about here tonight? Seeing none, do we have anybody on Zoom with final comments or anything?
I do have a hand raised on Zoom.
All right, let's hear him.
It's Chuck Meckling again, and I will look forward. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I look forward to the next time we have a public meeting. I apologize, Phil, that I'm not there tonight to be able to debate this issue and peel back some of the shades of confusion and be more realistic about the CDD elements, because many of the things that have been discussed tonight are handled appropriately and well by an HOA. So I take exception to the constant that they're better than an HOA. HOA is going to be charging fees and association dues on an annual basis, and there'll be an expense to the board and everything of the CDD district as well. But I'll look forward to the next time that we can be together and have a more lively conversation. There's a lot of information that was discussed tonight and there were plenty of them in St. Lucie County that were CDDs that went under, and sat for years upon years upon years. So it's not quite as clean as a whistle. And at the same time, when we talk about some of these counties like Pasco, I know that we don't feel that we want to be a Pasco County in the unbridled development and growth that those places have had. I do agree that there can be a spot for a CDD. I think that again, it goes back to the issue that the county took a lot of time to come up with some good visioning process on this, that you have a community of a certain size that has a certain group of elements, commercial, industrial, et cetera, that take trips off the road, that are job generators. These are the sort of things that create some proper and sorely needed potential tax revenue for the city of Sebastian as well. So I'll look forward to the next meeting on this. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for your input, sir. Do we have anyone else on Zoom?
No, at this time.
You have final statements, sir?
I was just going to say, I look forward to seeing you, Chuck. It's been a long time.
And thank you all very much. We really appreciate it. Enjoyed talking to you.
Bob? Yeah. All right, we're going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank y'all.